Rain tapped my window like impatient fingers, the kind of rain that made the city feel smaller and meaner, as if every streetlight was watching you struggle. I had just kicked off my shoes and loosened my cheap apron, my feet aching from a double shift at the diner, when my phone buzzed across the scratched coffee table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, because unknown numbers never brought anything good, but I had been waiting for the landlord to call back about my late rent, and desperation makes you do stupid things. I swiped to answer without looking, already forming an apology in my mouth. "Hello, this is Imani," I said, my voice thin from exhaustion. For a second, there was only quiet, heavy breathing, and then a man spoke, slow and certain, like he owned the air between us. "You answered," he said. "Not a question. A statement." My stomach tightened. "I think you have the wrong number," I replied, forcing politeness like a shield. He laughed once, low and sharp, and that sound carried something dangerous, something that made my neck prickle. "No," he said. "I never call the wrong number." I sat straighter, staring at the peeling wallpaper as if it might protect me. "Who is this?" I asked. Another pause, like he was deciding how much of himself to show. "Kong Jun-seo," he finally said, and the name landed like a stone in water, heavy and final. I had heard it before, not from friends or gossip, but from the kind of whispered fear that slid through certain neighborhoods when black cars parked outside certain buildings. My throat went dry. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know why you're calling me," he exhaled, almost amused. "You don't know yet," he answered. "But you will." I gripped the phone with both hands, my pulse thundering in my ears. "I'm not interested in games," I said, and I hated how small I sounded. "Then don't play," he replied, his tone sharpening. "Tell me where you are." My heart dropped. "No," I said immediately, "because there were some lines you didn't let strangers cross." His voice softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was control wrapped in velvet. "Imani," he said, as if tasting my name. "From now on, you're mine." The words were ridiculous, and yet they cut through me like a blade because they didn't sound like fantasy. They sounded like a decision already made. I swallowed hard. "You can't say that to people," I snapped, forcing anger to the surface, so fear would not show. "I can," he said. "I just did." I stood up and began pacing, my bare feet cold against the cheap floor. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Because someone tried to reach me," he said, "and your number answered instead." My mind raced, trying to make sense of that. "That's not my problem," I said, but my voice shook anyway. He ignored my protest like it was background noise. "You're going to do exactly what I say," he continued, "and you're going to be safe." I almost laughed at the word safe, because nothing about him sounded safe. "I don't need you," I said, and the lie tasted bitter because a part of me did need something, anything, that could stop the constant fear of being one paycheck away from ruin. He spoke again, quieter now, as if he was leaning close. "You're already on a list," he said. "Tonight, you became visible." My breath caught. "What list?" I whispered before I could stop myself. "The list of people who know too much," he replied. "And you don't even know what you know." I stared at my reflection in the dark window, seeing my own wide eyes and the faint outline of my face, young and tired and trying too hard to look brave. "I don't have time for this," I said, reaching for the end button with a trembling thumb. "You do," he said, and there was steel behind it now. "Look outside." My hand froze. Slowly, I stepped toward the window and pulled back the curtain a fraction. Down on the street, parked under a flickering lamp, was a black car so clean it looked unreal in my grimy neighborhood. The headlights were off, but I could feel it watching. My heart slammed against my ribs. "You're outside," I breathed. "I'm everywhere," he corrected. "And I'm giving you one chance to walk out the front door on your own." I backed away from the window like it had burned me. "If I don't?" I asked. "Then you'll learn what it feels like when the wrong people arrive first," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried something that almost sounded like anger, or maybe it was urgency. "Imani," he added. I don't repeat myself, my fingers curled around the phone until they hurt. I should have hung up. I should have called the police. I should have done something sensible, but my instincts, the ones I'd learned the hard way long before the city ever knew my name, were screaming one thing.
Move. Now.
The hallway outside my apartment smelled like wet concrete and old cigarettes, and every step toward the stairs felt like I was walking into a trap I couldn't see. I locked my door behind me because habit was stronger than fear, then forced myself to breathe slowly as I descended, one hand clutched around my phone like it was the only rope keeping me from falling. "I'm going downstairs," I muttered into the receiver, hating how obedient I sounded. "Good," Jun SEO said, as if he was watching me the whole time. "Do not run, why?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because running makes you look guilty," he replied. "And because my men will react before they think." The word men made my stomach twist harder. I stepped out onto the street, and the rain hit my face in cold sheets, flattening my curls against my cheeks and neck. The black car's back door opened smoothly, as if it had been waiting for me to appear. "Get in," he said. I stopped a few feet away, my chest rising and falling too fast. "I'm not getting into a stranger's car," I said, trying to sound firm. The door remained open, a dark mouth in the night. "You already know my name," he said. "That is not a stranger." I laughed bitterly, because it was easier than admitting I was terrified. "That's not how that works," I snapped. "Then learn how my world works," he replied, and suddenly the driver's side window lowered. I saw him for the first time through the rain-blurred glass, and the sight stole a fraction of my breath. He was younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair cut neat and expensive, the kind of haircut that never looked windblown even in a storm. His eyes were dark and steady, and even from this distance, I could feel their weight, like a hand on my throat. He wore a black suit and a crisp white collared shirt, no tie, as if he had ripped it off in impatience. He didn't look drunk on power the way I imagined criminals looked. He looked controlled. Dangerous because of how calm he was. He lifted the phone from his ear and spoke out loud, so I could hear him without the speaker. "Imani," he said, his voice the same as before but deeper now because it was closer. "Get in." Something in me bristled at the command, but something else, older and more cautious, noticed the way his gaze flicked up and down the street, scanning corners and rooftops, like he expected trouble. "Who are you hiding me from?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Not hiding," he corrected. "Protecting. From what?" I pressed, refusing to move. His eyes narrowed slightly. "From the man who dialed my number," he said. "He should not be alive, and he should not be calling anyone." A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the rain. "What does that have to do with me?" I demanded. He held my stare like he had all the time in the world. "Because he used you," he said. "Because he routed the call through your line, and now he thinks you are a door into my house." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible," I whispered, but even as I said it, my mind flashed back to earlier that day when a stranger had bumped into me near the diner's back entrance, apologizing too quickly, his hands too quick near my pocket. I had thought it was nothing. I had wanted it to be nothing. Junasio's gaze sharpened, like he could see my memory forming. "You remember," he said softly. I took an involuntary step backward. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. "You can lie to yourself," he said. "Do not lie to me." My anger sparked, hot and foolish. "You don't get to talk to me like I'm property," I said, my voice shaking with more than fear now. He watched me for a long beat, then opened his door and stepped out into the rain. He was taller than I expected, broad-shouldered, and the suit made him look like a weapon wrapped in fabric. He approached slowly, hands visible, but his presence was still a threat, like a storm you couldn't outrun. "In my world," he said, stopping close enough that I could smell clean cologne beneath the rain, "people take what they want. In your world, people take what they can." His eyes dropped to my face, lingering, and the intensity made my skin heat despite the cold. "You have been surviving on scraps," he continued. "I am offering you a shield." I swallowed, my breath shallow. "And what do you want in return?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like the question amused him. "You," he said simply. My heart stuttered because it sounded like obsession, like possession, like the beginning of a cage. "That's not a shield," I whispered. "That's a trap." His gaze flicked to my lips for the briefest second, and the small movement sent a shocking wave of awareness through me, like my body recognized danger and desire as twins. "Maybe," he said. "But it's the only trap tonight that ends with you alive." Then, quieter, as if it cost him something to admit it, he added, "Please."
Get in.
"I do not want to drag you." The word please, spoken by a man like him, felt like a crack in armor, and it confused me enough that I hesitated. In that hesitation, a car engine roared somewhere nearby, too fast, too angry, and Junesio's head snapped toward the sound. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist, and the contact was electric, warm and firm. "Now," he said, and there was no softness left. The next seconds were a blur of rain and adrenaline and the violent certainty of being hunted. Junesio shoved me into the back seat, his grip still tight on my wrist, then slammed the door and barked something in Korean to the driver. The car lurched forward, tires cutting through puddles, and I was thrown back against the leather seat that smelled like money and danger. I pressed my palms to the window, trying to see, but the rain smeared everything into moving shadows. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Junesio slid into the seat beside me with controlled speed, as if chaos was something he was used to handling. "That," he said, "was them confirming you are real." "Them who?" I snapped. He ignored the question for a moment, pulling a small device from his pocket and checking it, his face lit by a cold blue glow. I watched him, breathing hard, and hated that a part of me noticed how handsome he was even now, how his wet hair made him look younger, more human, like a man instead of a myth. "You should have stayed inside," I accused. He glanced at me, eyes sharp. "You should have not answered," he replied. The bluntness stung. "I didn't know," I insisted. "I'm just a waitress." His gaze held mine, and something like irony flickered there. "No one is just anything," he said. "Everyone belongs to someone's story." My chest tightened, because those words hit too close to a truth I tried to bury. The car sped through the city, past neon signs and wet streets, and I felt the distance growing between me and my little apartment, my small life, my illusion of control. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, forcing the question out past my fear.
"Home," he said.
I stared at him. "You're home," I clarified. He nodded once. "And you will not leave until I say you can." Anger flared again, but it tangled with something else, something that felt like being seen and claimed in the same breath. "You can't keep me," I said. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped. "I can," he said. "And tonight, I must." The car turned sharply, and for a second my shoulder pressed against his arm. Heat shot through me at the contact, unwanted and undeniable. I pulled away quickly, but he noticed, his eyes flicking to my face. "You're scared," he said. "Of course I'm scared," I snapped. "I'm in a car with a Mafia boss." He didn't smile, but something softened around his eyes. "You say it like a curse," he murmured. "It is," I said. "It's a death sentence." His jaw tightened again, and his gaze shifted to the window, scanning shadows. "It can be," he admitted. "Or it can be protection." I swallowed, then asked the question I had been avoiding. "Why me?" I whispered. He was quiet for a long time, and that silence filled the car like smoke. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Because you are a mistake," he said. "And mistakes are dangerous." "That's not an answer," I said, my frustration trembling. He turned his head and looked at me fully now, and the intensity of his attention made my skin prickle again. "You are not a random number," he said. "You have been near my business for weeks." My breath hitched. "That's impossible," I whispered, but images rushed forward, uninvited. The diner's private room where men in expensive suits met late at night. The envelope I had once found under a table, heavy with cash, and the way my manager had snatched it from my hands with shaking fingers. The black cars outside. The feeling of being watched. Junesio's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "Someone is trying to reach the core of my organization," he said. "They failed before. Now they are using softer targets. His gaze dropped to my hands, to the faint scars on my knuckles from years of fighting and surviving. You are softer than you pretend, he added quietly. I hated that my eyes stung. You don't know me, I whispered. His eyes lifted to mine. I know enough, he said. I know you don't go home the same way each night. I know you keep a small knife in your apron pocket. I know you flinch when someone touches your shoulder from behind. My blood turned to ice. How do you know that? I demanded. Because I watch what matters, he replied, and his voice held something almost like confession, almost like obsession. My mouth went dry. Why would I matter to you? I asked, and the question came out smaller than I wanted. He stared at me for a long beat, then lifted his hand slowly, stopping short of my cheek, as if he was deciding whether he had the right. Because you were brave enough to answer, he said softly. And because you have a past you are hiding, my breath caught, sharp and painful because the word past was a door I kept locked for a reason. I looked away, focusing on the streaks of rain sliding down the glass. I don't, I lied. He didn't push the lie. He just leaned back, his presence heavy beside me. You will tell me the truth, he said. Either willingly, or when it saves your life. The car slowed, then turned through tall iron gates that opened like the jaws of a monster. Beyond them, a mansion rose out of the rain, lights glowing warm against the darkness, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. My stomach dropped. This is your home, I whispered. Juneseo's eyes stayed on the mansion, like it was a battlefield. This is where people come to die, he corrected. Then he looked at me again, and his voice softened in a way that made my chest ache with confusion. But you, he said, are not dying tonight. They escorted me inside like I was both a guest and a prisoner, and the contrast was dizzying. The foyer smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume, and my wet shoes left ugly marks on marble that probably cost more than my yearly rent. Men in dark suits moved quietly around us, their eyes respectful toward Juneseo and unreadable toward me. One of them, a tall bodyguard with a scar near his eyebrow, glanced at my face and then quickly looked away, as if he had been told not to stare. Take her upstairs, Juneseo ordered, his voice snapping back into command. Dry clothes, he added after a beat, and I caught the smallest pause, like he was calculating whether kindness was safe. And lock the perimeter, he continued, eyes hard. No one enters without my approval, the bodyguard nodded. Yes, boss. I flinched at the word boss, because it made everything too real. I can walk, I said, trying to reclaim a shred of dignity. Juneseo's gaze flicked to me. You will, he replied. But you will not wander. He stepped closer, and the men around us seemed to fade back, giving him space like gravity demanded it. Imani, he said, quieter now. Do not test my patience, I lifted my chin. Do not threaten me, I replied, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. For a heartbeat, something like admiration flickered across his face, quick and dangerous. Good, he murmured. You still have fire. Then he reached out and brushed his thumb across my wrist where he had grabbed me earlier, a gesture so intimate it made my skin burn. You will need it, he said, and then he turned away, already giving orders to someone on the phone in rapid Korean. The bodyguard guided me up a wide staircase, and with each step I felt like I was leaving my old life further behind. The room they put me in was enormous, soft lighting, a bed that looked too perfect to touch, and a view of the storm through tall windows. A woman in a simple black uniform appeared with a robe and a towel, her eyes downcast. Please, she said quietly. Change. I stared at the robe like it was a costume for a role I never auditioned for. Am I a prisoner? Asked her. She hesitated. You are protected, she finally whispered, and the way she said it sounded like a warning. I changed slowly, my hands trembling, then wrapped the robe tight around my body as if fabric could hold me together. When the woman left, the door clicked, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. My chest tightened, and I rushed to the door, twisting the handle.
Locked.
Of course, I muttered, a bitter laugh escaping. I turned and paced the room, my bare feet sinking into thick carpet. This was insane. This was a nightmare. And yet my mind kept circling back to Juneseo's eyes, to the way he had looked at me like I was a problem he intended to solve personally. A knock sounded, and before I could answer, the door opened. Junaseo stepped inside alone, his jacket gone now, sleeves rolled up, the white shirt slightly rumpled, like the night had clawed at him too. He closed the door behind him, and the room felt smaller instantly. "You locked me in," I said, my voice sharp. He looked at me calmly. "Yes," he replied. "Because you would run, maybe I should," I snapped. He took a step closer, and the air between us tightened. "And run to where?" he asked. "Back to the street where they can grab you?" I swallowed, anger and fear twisting together. "Who are they?" I demanded again. His gaze darkened. "A man named Beck," he said. Chairman Beck, the name hit me strangely, like a distant echo. Why does that sound familiar? I whispered before I could stop myself. Junaseo's eyes sharpened. "Because your past is not as buried as you think," he said. My heart pounded. "I don't know what you mean," I insisted, but my voice was weaker now. He stepped closer until he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him. He lifted his hand slowly, and this time he touched my cheek, his fingers warm, his thumb brushing away a raindrop I hadn't realized was still there. The tenderness shocked me more than the violence. "You are shaking," he murmured. I hated that he noticed, hated that he cared.
Hai fine, Ilid.
His gaze dropped to my lips again, and my stomach flipped in a way that made me furious at myself. "No," he said softly. "You are not." He leaned in slightly, not quite kissing me, but close enough that I could feel his breath. "Tell me the truth," he whispered. "Who are you really?" My chest constricted, memories pressing against the locked door in my mind. A different city. A different night. A scream swallowed into darkness. I clenched my fists. "I'm Imani," I said, forcing the words out. "Just Imani." He watched me for a long beat, then pulled back slightly, his expression hardening again like he had reminded himself what softness cost. "Then listen, Imani," he said. "From this moment, you do exactly what I say." I glared at him. "Or what?" I challenged. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed controlled. "Or you will die," he said simply. Then, quieter, like it was the most dangerous truth he could admit, he added, "And I do not allow what is mine to be taken." The possessive words should have made me recoil. Instead, they sent a shiver down my spine that felt like fear tangled with something far more dangerous. He turned away abruptly and walked to the window, scanning the darkness outside, as if expecting shadows to move. "You will sleep," he said, voice clipped. "You will eat," he added. "And tomorrow, I will find out who touched your life." I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. "Why do you care?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, he didn't look at me. "Because I recognize survivors," he said. "And because Beck does not chase strangers." He turned then, and his gaze pinned me in place. "He chases debts," he said. "And you," he finished, "look like someone who owes him something." My blood went cold, because deep down, in the place where I kept my worst memories, I knew he was right. Sleep didn't come, not really, because every time my eyes closed, my mind dragged me back to the past I had been running from, the one I never spoke about because speaking made it real again. I lay in the massive bed with my body tense under soft sheets, listening to the storm and the faint footsteps in the hallway beyond my locked door. I tried to tell myself this was temporary, that I would find a way out, that I would go back to my small apartment and my small life. But the problem was, my small life had cracks in it, and Junaseo had just shoved his fingers into those cracks and pulled. At some point near dawn, the door opened quietly, and I bolted upright, my heart slamming. Junaseo stepped in, his face shadowed with exhaustion, his hair slightly messy now, as if the night had been a battle he didn't win cleanly. He held a phone in his hand, and his eyes went straight to mine. "They came," he said. My throat tightened. "Who?" I whispered. He walked closer, stopping at the foot of the bed. "Beck's people," he replied. "They tested the gate." My breath caught. "And?" I asked. His jaw clenched. "They left a message," he said. "For you." My stomach dropped. "For me?" I repeated, my voice breaking. Junaseo's gaze stayed steady, but there was something dangerous in it now, something that looked like restrained fury. "They know your name," he said. "They know you are here." I gripped the sheets, my knuckles white. "That's impossible," I whispered again, because disbelief was easier than panic. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Nothing is impossible when fear is currency," he said. "Beck spends it well." I swallowed hard. "What message?" I asked. Junesio's eyes flicked down to the phone, then back to my face. He said, Junesio began, and the way his voice tightened told me he hated repeating it, that he wants his girl back. My entire body went still. The phrase hit like a slap, dragging a buried memory up by the hair. A cramped room. A man's hand on my arm, too tight, too claiming. A voice saying, "You belong to us now." I pressed a hand to my mouth, breathing shallow. Junesio watched me, and the silence between us thickened with understanding. "You know him," he said, not as a guess, but as a conclusion. I shook my head automatically, denial rising.
No, y whispered.
"I don't." He stepped closer, and his presence felt like a wall. "Imani," he said, and the way he said my name was quieter now, almost careful. "Look at me." I forced my eyes up. His gaze was intense, but it wasn't cruel. It was focused, like he was trying to keep me from drowning.
"Tell me," he said.
"What did he do to you?" My throat tightened painfully. "Nothing." I lied, but the word came out cracked. Junesio's jaw flexed, and his hand lifted slowly, stopping just short of touching me again, like he was asking permission without words. "You are safe here," he said, and the softness in his voice made my eyes sting. "But I cannot protect you from a ghost you refuse to name." I swallowed, my breath shaking. "I was younger," I began, the words scraping out like glass. "I wasn't even an adult yet." Junesio's eyes narrowed, and something dark moved behind them. "Where?" he asked. "What country?" I shook my head, tears threatening, humiliation burning. "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "It's over." His voice hardened instantly. "It is not over if he is here," he snapped. Then he softened again, like he had caught himself. "Please," he said, and that word again from him felt like a weapon turned inward. "Let me fight him for you." My chest tightened at the offer, because it sounded too much like rescue, and rescue had always come with a price. "Why would you do that?" I whispered, and the question carried everything I was too afraid to say. He stared at me for a long beat, then stepped closer until he was within arm's reach, close enough that I could see the faint bruise-colored shadows under his eyes. "Because when I heard your voice," he said slowly, something in me shifted, his mouth tightened like he hated admitting it. "Because I do not like helplessness," he continued. "And you," he said, gaze burning, "make me want to burn down the world that hurt you." My breath caught, and heat flooded my face, unwanted and terrifying. I should have hated him for saying that, for making it sound like romance when it was still danger. Instead, my heart twisted painfully, because no one had ever spoken about my pain like it mattered. "That's insane," I whispered. He nodded once. "Yes," he agreed. "But it is true." He reached out then, finally touching, his fingers wrapping gently around my wrist, and the gentleness somehow felt more intense than force. "You will stay here," he said, voice firm again. "You will let my people guard you." I swallowed. "And if I don't?" I asked, weakly defiant. His gaze darkened, and his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, where my pulse hammered. "Then I will keep you anyway," he said. "And I will hate myself for how I do it." The honesty in that made my stomach flip. I looked down at his hand on my skin, at the contrast between his control and the careful way he held me, like he was trying not to break something fragile. "I don't want to be owned," I whispered. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Then don't be owned," he said. "Be chosen." My breath hitched, because the word chosen sounded like freedom, even though everything else about this felt like a cage. His eyes held mine, and for one impossible moment, the fear eased enough that I felt something else rise through it, something warm and dangerous and alive. Then a distant alarm sounded downstairs, sharp and urgent, and Junesio's had snapped toward the door, his body tensing instantly, like a predator sensing blood. He looked back at me, his gaze fierce. "Stay," he commanded. Do not move. He turned to leave, then paused, as if fighting himself, and came back in 2 quick steps. Before I could speak, he cupped my face with both hands and pressed a brief, hard kiss to my forehead, a gesture that felt like a vow and a warning at the same time. "You are mine," he said against my skin, voice rough with something that sounded like need. "And I will not lose you." Then he was gone, and the door locked again, and I sat there shaking, not just from fear, but from the terrifying realization that some part of me, buried deep under survival, had wanted him to touch me like that. The hours that followed stretched thin and sharp, every minute humming with tension that refused to settle. I paced the room until my legs ached, replaying Junesio's words over and over. The way his voice had softened when he spoke about protecting me, the way his hands had trembled just slightly when he touched my face. I told myself it was manipulation, that men like him did not feel. They calculated, but my body remembered that kiss on my forehead like it was a brand. When the door finally opened again, it was long past sunrise, and the light filtering through the windows was pale and uncertain, like it did not trust the day either. Junesio stepped inside, his suit replaced with a dark shirt and slacks, his movements tight with restrained fury. "It's over for now," he said. I searched his face. "What happened?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "They were testing my response," he said. "Beck wanted to see how fast I would move for you." My stomach twisted. "And?" I pressed. His eyes locked onto mine. "I moved very fast," he said. Something heavy and complicated settled in my chest. "You shouldn't have," I whispered. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping so close I had to tilt my head to meet his gaze. "I would do worse," he said quietly. Do not ever doubt that. Fear flickered through me, but it was tangled now with something warmer, something that made my pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. "You scare me," I admitted, my voice low. His expression softened, just a fraction. "Good," he said. "You should fear me," then he added, so quietly it almost broke him. "But you should trust me more." The honesty disarmed me more than any threat could have. "Why?" I asked. "Because I am not the man who hurt you," he replied. "And I will never allow him to touch you again." The certainty in his voice wrapped around me like armor, and before I could stop myself, I stepped closer. The space between us vanished. "You don't know what he did," I whispered. Junesio's jaw tightened. "I know enough," he said. "I know the way your body stiffens when someone raises their voice. I know how you sleep with one hand curled like you're ready to fight." His gaze dropped to my lips, lingering. "And I know that despite all of that, you're still here." My breath hitched. "I don't want to be weak," I said. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, but I didn't. His fingers brushed my arm, warm and steady. "You are not weak," he said. "You survived." His touch sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. "And survival," he added, "is my language." I swallowed, my heart pounding. "What happens now?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his hand and tucked a damp curl behind my ear, his knuckles grazing my cheek. The tenderness of the gesture made my eyes sting. "Now," he said softly, "you let me show you what safety feels like." I should have laughed. I should have pushed him away. Instead, I leaned into his touch, just slightly, and that small movement felt like a choice I could never take back. The days blurred together after that, tension easing into something fragile and strange. I was never alone, not really, but Junesio made sure I was never smothered either. He checked on me constantly, sometimes in silence, sometimes with questions that were careful and precise. He brought me meals himself when he could, sitting across from me at the long dining table, watching to make sure I ate. "You don't have to stare," I told him one afternoon, irritation masking my nerves. He didn't look away. "I do," he replied. "It tells me you are still here." I rolled my eyes, but heat crept into my face. At night, I slept better than I had in years, not because the danger was gone, but because someone was standing between me and it. One evening, after a long, tense call he refused to explain, Junesio came to my room and sat beside me on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look human and tired. "Come here," he said quietly. I hesitated, then moved closer. He didn't touch me at first. He just sat there, his presence solid. You don't have to do this, I murmured. He glanced at me. I want to, he said simply. That answer undid me more than any grand gesture could have. What if this gets you killed? I asked. His lips curved in a humorless smile. Everything gets me killed eventually, he said. At least this would be worth it. My chest tightened painfully. I don't want to be the reason, I whispered. He turned fully toward me then, his gaze intense. You are not a reason, he said. You are the exception. Before I could respond, he reached out and cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. This time, when he leaned in, I didn't pull away. Our lips met softly at first, tentative and careful, like he was giving me space to change my mind. The kiss was warm, unhurried, nothing like the violent world he ruled. My breath caught, and I kissed him back, fingers curling into his shirt like I needed to anchor myself. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. Tell me to stop, he whispered. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. Don't. The word felt like surrender and choice all at once. Everything changed after that, not suddenly, but inevitably. The world outside pressed closer, Beck's shadow stretching longer as he realized Jun Seo would not hand me over. One night, Jun Seo came to me with blood on his knuckles and fire in his eyes. We end this tomorrow, he said. Fear flared, sharp and immediate. End it how? I demanded. He brushed his thumb across my jaw, grounding me. By cutting the head off the snake, he replied. Beck wants you because he thinks you are leverage. His gaze hardened. He is wrong, my heart pounded. I don't want you to die, I said, my voice breaking. He pressed his forehead to mine. I do not plan to, he murmured. But if I fall, you will run. I grab his shirt, panic rising. No, I said fiercely. I won't. His eyes softened, and he kissed me deeply, like he was memorizing me. You will, he said. Because you deserve a life beyond this. Tears burned my eyes. What about you? I asked. He smiled faintly. I have made my choices, he said. You are mine. The words should have sounded possessive, but they felt like devotion. And I will fight for you. The confrontation came at dawn, gunfire echoing through the estate like thunder. I stayed where he told me, hands shaking, heart in my throat, every second stretching into agony. When the noise finally stopped, silence was worse. Then footsteps, fast and purposeful. The door burst open, and Jun Seo stood there, bruised, bleeding, alive. I ran to him without thinking, throwing my arms around his neck. He held me tightly, burying his face in my hair. It's over, he said hoarsely. He's gone. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees nearly gave out. You're hurt, I whispered. He pulled back, looking at me like I was the only thing keeping him upright. I will heal, he said. As long as you stay, I nodded, tears streaming freely now. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He cupped my face, kissing me deeply, fiercely, like the world had tried to take us both and failed. Weeks later, the estate felt different, quieter, like the violence had bled out of the walls. Jun Seo changed too, slowly, deliberately. He still ruled his world, but he no longer let it consume him entirely. Some nights, we stood on the balcony together, city lights stretching endlessly below us. Do you regret answering that call? He asked once. I thought about it, about fear and cages and choices. Then I shook my head. No, I said. It brought me here, he smiled, genuine and rare. It brought you to me, he corrected. I leaned into him, his arm wrapping around my shoulders protectively. From now on, I said softly, teasing. You're mine too, he laughed quietly, pressing a kiss to my temple. I have been, he replied.